I was born October 18th, 1980, so of 1980 to Brian David Schwartz and Angela K. Bruns, although her last name at the time was Schwartz because she was married to my dad. Um, I don't remember anything about my mom from that time. I remember living with my dad, and I remember my older brother put a bird in his pocket and it poked a hole in his leg. I remember my stepmom hurting her leg skiing. Her name was Kathy. She wasn't married to my dad at the time. I remember being in a foster home. They, well, my dad went to prison for selling cocaine, and I didn't know it at the time. I just knew that I didn't get to see my dad. My mom wanted us. We were in foster care in Nebraska. We had a good foster home. My mom was granted temporary custody, and we went to Colorado. She was with a guy named Larry, and they broke up. I remember being taken away from my mother. Me and my older brother and my little sister were separated. At first, me and Eric were in the same foster home, and Tara and Michael were in different foster homes. And I remember they kept telling me that I'd get to see my mom this weekend. I'd get to see my mom this weekend, and she didn't show up. Well, she'll get to see you this weekend, and she didn't show up. Well, she'll get to see you this weekend, and she didn't show up. I remember that it was my little brother Michael, his dad, Larry Allen Albert, was the reason that we were removed from my mom's house. We were in Erie, Colorado. We had a next door neighbor named Teresa Cope, and it's now Teresa Horn. And I remember me and my older brother were pretty young. We were looking around the house for Larry's gun. We were going to kill him. He wouldn't stop hitting my mom. He wouldn't stop hitting me. He wouldn't stop hitting Eric. Tara and Michael were still pretty young. They were too little for him to be hitting. But I remember Larry threw my mom down. We had a rock in our front yard, and he threw her down, and she broke her neck on the rock. My mom survived it, but the cops came. Jane LaRue was an officer, and she rescued us, and she took us to a halfway house. They don't have many of these anymore because most of the funding goes to prisons. My mom couldn't stay off the cocaine though, so we went back into the foster care system. More of the lies, more of the empty promises. You'll see your mom this weekend. You'll see your mom this weekend. You'll see your mom this weekend. And then I remember going to Centennial Peaks in Boulder County, Colorado. What I remember is one of my foster families was doing things they shouldn't have. The story my mom told me was that I threw a desk at a teacher, but she wasn't there, so whatever she heard was secondhand. they told her that a 5-year-old me, almost 6 years old, had thrown a desk at a teacher, a pregnant teacher. At least that's what my mom told me many years later. And I remember we were in Centennial Peaks, and I got to see my mom for the first time in quite a few months. It was 1986 by this time, of course. And I remember I hadn't seen my older brother, and I hadn't seen my little brother or my little sister in a while. I remember my first day there, sitting next to my mom, and the doctor on the other side of the desk had somebody else's file open. And I read the word schizophrenic upside down from across the table. 6-year-olds can't read words like schizophrenic, especially not upside down. Well, I'm not a regular 6-year-old. And my mom signed some papers and they left. And I was alone. They wanted to give me drugs. And they wanted me to take part in groups. And I was just so tired I fell asleep. And I remember being slammed to the floor. I remember them shoving my arm up my back and how much it hurt. I remember them strapping me to a bed, and I remember them injecting me with their drugs, and I'm screaming for my mom the whole time. I remember going to my grandmother's funeral in Nebraska. My dad was released from prison temporarily just long enough to go to the funeral. Me and Eric were both there, and we weren't allowed to go. I remember that I was staying with my Aunt Mary at the time, and we got there late. And I remember I poked my grandma on the cheek, and her eye caved in. My older brother remembers this too, so does my Aunt Mary. I know these memories aren't all in order, and that makes it more complicated. Over the years, you forget what order it happened in, or where you were, or who you were with. But I try my best. But you gotta understand, at the time I was going through a lot of abuse. I remember they had me on a lot of pills. I remember I was able to talk to my mom one morning during med run, is what they call it, in Centennial Peaks. I remember I had a roommate named Noah. I later had a roommate named Eric Grisham, who my older brother, when he was transferred to that facility later on, had the same roommate. He ran into Eric many, many years later. That's not an important part of this story. I remember that I was transferred to from that facility to another one, and another one, and another one, and each facility seemed to be getting worse. They would do worse things, more drugs, more pills. Getting back to that med run, I remember I was talking to my mom, and I was so excited. I was like, "Mom, I get to take 12 pills for breakfast." And I remember recounting them and realizing that there was actually 13. And how I felt bad because I didn't count them right. I remember missing my older brother. I didn't really know my little sister that well. And I didn't really know my little brother brother at all. I remember my mom came and got us for a temporary visit, and there was a situation with Eric at Colorado Christian Home. One of the staff members had molested him, and he'd done it to other people too. And I remembered that I had been in a lot of classes and in a lot of people with a lot of kids that were molested. I knew what it was about. I remember during that visit, my mom didn't have my little brother Michael. He was living with his dad, Larry Albert, the one who broke my mom's neck. My mom had on a blonde wig, and my new soon-to-be stepdad, Scott, was with us, and they were trying to smuggle Michael out of a window in a church. And I remember Larry coming out and threatening to kill my mom. And Scott, I mean, he's tiny. He fucking folded. He wasn't gonna do anything. He literally ran and hid behind the vehicle. Um, I remember my dad got out of prison, and he and my mom came to visit me at Mount St. Vincent's home. And there was some pretty bad rain, and it actually was bad enough that it forced open a manhole. And my dad wanted to take pictures of it, and he lost his lens cap trying to take the picture. And how angry he was about it. And I remember they still told me I'd get to see my mom. I'd get to see my mom this weekend, this weekend, this weekend. And she never showed up and never showed up and never showed up. For 2.5 years. Temporary foster care. 2 weeks per foster home. You're not allowed to visit the same foster home twice. So, and my dad was trying to fight for custody of me. And he won. I remember that I'd gotten to visit him while he was in jail. And I remembered that he had married Kathy, the lady who hurt her leg skiing. And my older brother was already with him. And I remember when I moved in, I didn't know anything really about white people. I didn't really know anything about my dad. I didn't really know much about my mom. I knew that I missed them. And my dad and Kathy, they were broken up by this time. They were still married, and I still got to see Kathy. She was pretty important to me. I remember my dad was drinking a lot. He liked to drink rum and coke. I remember he was smarter than a lot of the kids that I knew. He didn't punch me in the face. He punched me in the gut. He liked the way that I danced around, doubled over, going trying to fight for breath. I remember he was beating me up one day. He didn't really care where he hit me on that day. He just wasn't going to hit me in the face. He punched me in the chest and he punched me in the stomach. And I remember that I ran away. And I remember being in Tacoma General Hospital. remember more medications, and I remember from there they said they didn't have anywhere to take me. I remember that the police officer that I talked to when they came and got me, he had told me I had a choice between living with my dad or going back into the system. I remember I was scared shitless of both. I remember being in Fairfax. I remember the sex classes again and the abuse classes. And I remember one of the staff members, I tried to tell on him he was doing things he shouldn't have to myself and a girl named Ananda. She had a broken arm. She got beaten up by her family, and they didn't have anywhere to put her either, and that's why she was there. By this time, I wasn't in Colorado because my dad lived in Washington State. He got together with a woman named Diane Bartley. She had 2 kids of her own, one named DJ and one named Dana. And I remember being in Fairfax, and when I told on Steve, they didn't want to listen. They didn't want to believe me. And I remember having flashbacks to that 2.5 years of being in foster care, the last stint in Colorado, how some of the foster families were really nice, and about how some of them were really mean, and about maybe if I go to another facility, it'll be different. And Fairfax is just temporary. I was there for a few months, I don't know how many. I remember I was transferred to Child Study and Treatment Center in Tacoma, Washington, or in Kent, Washington, I believe. Fairfax was in Kent. Child Study and Treatment Center was in Tacoma. I remember Command Sergeant Major Reuben Greer worked there, and he was good to me. I remember there was a nighttime staff member, and his name was Woody, and he was good to me too. He had arthritis in his hands, so he used to be an artist, but he couldn't do it anymore. And I remember he stayed up all night drawing a picture for me. I don't remember him being up or drawing the picture, but I remember him giving it to me. It was huge. I mean, especially to a kid, it was like this wide by, well, it was big. And I remember there was a therapist there. She was doing her internship, and she gave me a book called The Way Things Work. And I remember she was really pretty. I remember that she listened to me. I remember there was a lady there named Gretchen who was really nice. I remember the timeout room there and how I kicked the door off once. Made me feel like Superman. It's not like I was the first person to kick that door, though. I got into the doorway with my back to it, and I donkey kicked it, and it probably had metal stress from all of the kids who had done that before. And that's why it broke. I remember it was mostly minority kids there, and I remember them beating me up a lot. I remember there was a girl named Tamara there, and I remember that she used to get the other black kids to gang up on me. And I remember there was a kid who showed up who had blown his leg off. He only had one leg. and he was a racist asshole. And I remember him showing up and being racist was the reason Tamara left me alone. And I remember Sheila and Shanda were there. Sheila shaved her head bald. She had been molested by her family, and she was a man hater as a result, but she was nice to me. And her and Shanda looked out for me. Shanda was a very big young woman, and we were all patients there. And I remember Craig. I knew him from Fairfax, and he came in, and him and Sheila became boyfriend and girlfriend, kind of, sort of. I remember there was a Muslim named Rel. He spelled his name Ariel, but his name was Rel. I remember he looked out for me. And I remember that he was black, so was Command Sergeant Major Reuben Greer. And I remember them explaining to the other kids that just because I'm white doesn't mean that it's my fault that those bad things happened to them. I remember there was a girl named Crystal, and she was pregnant. Her dad had gotten her pregnant. And I remember she had a baby while we were there. I remember they took her baby away because she was only 14. And she stayed there with us. And I remember the rich kids, their families would always come see them, but mine never did. They never did. I saw my mom twice, 3 times the whole time I was locked up in Colorado. I saw my dad once the whole time I was locked up in Colorado. The whole time I was at Fairfax, and the whole time I was at Child Study and Treatment Center, my dad never once came to see me. My mom never once came to see me. The same thing at Child Study and Treatment Center. Same thing at Tacoma General. I remember when they let me out, my dad finally came to get me. He was telling me how much I owed him because it cost Diane's insurance $50 a day that they had to pay for me to stay there. That the insurance had to pay $1,000 a day for me to stay there, and that all of his money working went to me being there. And I remember for the first 2 or 3 weeks that he was really nice to me. And he bought me things. And I remember when him and Diane got married, I remember they went to Hawaii, and DJ, Diane's son, was in charge of us. And me and Eric smoked a bunch of pot with him. And because DJ was in charge of us. And I remember I got really drunk on strawberry daiquiri, and he puked it up all over the bathroom. And I remembered the smell of that. I still remember the smell of that. And I spent the whole night cleaning it up, and most of the day cleaning it up. I thought I did a great job, but I didn't. My dad came back, him and Diane, and they wanted to know why there was blood in our bathroom. And it wasn't blood, it was strawberry daiquiri. He wanted to know why it stinked. I remember he got into a fight with Eric. Eric was about 13. And Eric beat up my dad. My dad's a pretty big guy. Eric beat him up. And my dad kicked him out. And I remember my dad and Diane wanted to go on vacation to Alaska to go see Diane's sister. And when we were supposed to leave, we had to go back to the house. When we got back to the house, Eric was there with one of his friends. I remember I used to drink just part of a soda pop at a time and put it in the fridge even though it was open. And I saw one in there and I went to take a drink and it was not soda pop, it was alcohol. I remember my dad yelling at Eric and kicking him out. And Eric stole a bunch of my Metallica t-shirts. I also remember when we moved to California because Dad didn't want to be with Diane anymore. I remember getting beaten up by a lot of the Mexican kids, and we used to have a place over by the police station we called base. And if we made it to base, we were safe. You just had to wait there long enough for the Mexican kids to get home. If they made it home, then they weren't on the streets, and you could almost safely make it back to your place without getting beaten up. And I remember Lisa Johnberg poking a hole in my brother's cheek with a pipe. I remember two drug addicts attacking me and my older brother, breaking his glasses. He had some John Lennon glasses, and he broke my brother's glasses, and I was pissed off my older brother wouldn't fight him. I remember we used to try to get Eric to break stuff over his head because it was really cool. He'd break stuff over his head, just like in the karate movies. And I remember when I was released from Child Study and Treatment Center where my dad lived. He lived in the same place he lives now with my stepmom Diane. I remember that it was Lincoln High School that I went to. It was Tacoma, Washington. I remember most of the kids I went to school with were black or Asian, so I felt pretty at home. And I remember my dad and I got into a fight about an F in PE, and he'd already done the whole punching me in the stomach while he's lecturing me, and he'd hit me probably, I don't even know how many times he hit me. So I went and I ran away and I called my mom, and my mom called the cops, and the cops came and got me. And I remember they said I could either live with my dad or I could go into the system again. I wanted to go back into the system. I was hoping I'd go back to Child Study and Treatment Center. It wasn't so bad there. I mean, at first it was really bad, being the only white kid there, or one of the few white kids there. But my dad promised me that if I decided to stay with him instead, that he would get me on an airplane to go stay with my mom. I remember he told me, "Sean, you need to cut your hair first, though. I'm not putting you on the plane looking like a fag. They'll beat you up for being a fag down there." It's here in Nebraska. This very town, Chapel, Nebraska. So I reluctantly cut my hair. And I came here, and I remember that kids here weren't very nice to me. I wasn't a part of their reindeer games. I remember my mom kept on asking me to get cocaine for her, and I didn't know anybody with cocaine. I remember my older brother worked for a guy named Doug Cowden, and he provided me and Eric with weed. And I remember he was Rand Ingersoll's stepdad. And I remember Ray and his mom driving me to school my first day in Lodgepole because I wasn't allowed to go to school in Chapel. My older brother and my little sister had already gotten kicked out. And in Lodgepole, I had a bully named Dylan Bauer. And another bully named Shauna Talish, and there were a lot of bullies there, but it was Dylan Bauer and Miss Susie, one of the teachers, and Shauna Talish that incited all the meanness and propagated all the meanness, and Miss Lucy would turn a blind eye to people picking on me. She was a real religious lady. My first day in her class, she said, "You guys have to deal with things that I didn't have to deal with when I was in school. Like, you guys got devil worshippers in your school, like Eric Schwartz and his brother Sean." And she pointed right at me. I remember there was a kid there named Sam Wilkins, and he was my only friend. I remember I was lab partners in Mr. Howard's class with a girl named Gina who was half black, and she was really nice to me. And I remember the first time I saw her, I was glad to see somebody who wasn't white. I was tired of hearing the N-word. I was tired of the racism and the hatred. Gina is Andrew Buchter's daughter. For those of you who follow my stories at all, you know who Andrew Buchter is. I remember Dusty Payton flicking quarters at me. A lot of kids flick quarters at me and dimes and nickels. I'd sit in the auditorium because I didn't have money for lunch. And they'd come and flick stuff at me, and I'd take the money that they were trying to hit me with and laughing about, and I'd go buy me something out of the soda machine. I remember they used to make fun of me for that, but I was just glad to have the soda pop. I remember running next to the school bus because Dylan just wouldn't leave me alone. He kept pushing me into lockers and teasing me, and I was fed up with it. So I ran next to the bus all the way to the football field, and the teacher told me if I was going to fight Dylan, I had to fight all of the football players. I grew up in the system. I was down. So then he threatened to call the cops. So I left. I remember that after the first time riding with Regina and all of her man-hating and how she seemed to direct it all at me, that I walked to school in Lodgepole every day, and I jogged back from school every day. I remember one day Dusty Payton was flicking quarters at me and pennies and stuff, hit me in the head with them in Mrs. Ford's class. That was her home ec teacher. And I remember how Shauna Talish was egging him on. And I remember how Miss Susie kicked me out of class when I yelled at him for flicking stuff at me. It's not like she didn't know. You could hear the pennies flicking. You could hear Dusty's fingers. You could hear it clinging on the ground. You probably heard it bouncing off my head even. I remember Mr. Addison was the principal, and I got kicked out, and I had to go to school in Chapel. Lodgepole is 9 miles away from Chapel, so it was 9 miles each direction. It wasn't uphill both ways. It's pretty flat here in Nebraska, and it wasn't barefoot in the snow. But you know, that took 18 miles of walking off of my trip. I remember they wanted me to play football and try out for track because so many people had seen me going to school every day on their way to work in Sydney at Cabela's. And I remember trying out for track. I didn't do very good. I remember there wasn't much food in the house. My mom kept spending it on cocaine. I remember working for Janet Roberts cleaning Cabela's corporate offices. I remember a kid named Chance Dale. I just knew him as the fat fucker who throws rocks at me. He used to throw rocks at me at lunch every day in Chapel High School. I remember my money was supposed to go to getting myself a vehicle, but it just ended up all going to food, every bit of it. I remember that I hated it at my mom's house. I remember that Scott was ordering porn while he was traveling abroad as an electrician. I remember him coming home and blaming it on me and saying that I got a hold of his credit card. I didn't even know how to use a credit card. I remember Pastor Osteen. I remember the Chapel Assembly of God. I remember my first day there, 3 people who had told me they were in the KKK were part of the congregation. I remember Pastor Osteen came to the house to talk to Scott. My mom's not much of a housekeeper. I did my own laundry. I washed it with Dawn because I'm allergic to laundry detergent. I remember there was a pair of underwear sticking skid mark up. And my stepdad, Scott, he was telling me that I needed to clean up my underwear. I said, I don't wear underwear, and neither does Eric. Those are yours. Right in front of the pastor. I remember I was working for Doug Cowden doing roofing for the summer. And my older brother was already moved out of the house. And I remember Doug Cowden hadn't paid me. I remember that my dad had had me learning how to build porno websites in Washington State. And I remember I had been working for a beekeeper, and my dad had been taking my money for rent. And I remember he sent me some money to get a vehicle. It was my money. I had earned it. It wasn't his money, it was mine. He should have sent it earlier. But he didn't send it to me, he sent it to my mom. I remember my Uncle Greg Bruns had tried to kill his ex-girlfriend. He ran into the back of her car with his pickup truck. This is Jerry Sparks' sister. And I remember my mom telling me I'm going to get that car. I remember my Uncle Greg telling me that the engine was screwed and it was a bad car. I remember my mom telling me that Uncle Greg's just saying that because he doesn't want to sell it. I bought it for $1,000. This is after my older brother and Doug promised me that we were going to go to Colorado and buy a Ford Mustang. And when I got there, it was a guy in a carpet van. It was a TGI Fridays. And I remember Doug came back and he told me, hey, he's got a guitar for sale, a Fender Stratocaster. And I remember Eric was all sorts of a baddie, like, oh yeah, Eric, Sean, it's a Fender Stratocaster. I remember I was working for Doug at the time and he still hadn't paid me. I remember I listened to my older brother and I gave him the money for the Fender to go with the car. I remember Doug came back with a pound of marijuana. That was what the $900 was for. He had a box of garbage and he pulled up the garbage. There was some cardboard underneath and a pound of marijuana was under that. He says, this is what we're going to get your Mustang with. And I remember him and Eric were snorting cocaine on the way back to chapel, and I was pissed off at him, and they threatened to drop me off on the side of the road. Mind you, I'm not even 18 at this point in time. I'm only 16. And I remember Doug was going to pay me back, and he was going to pay me back, and he was going to pay me back. And I remember Brandon Jepson worked for Janet Roberts at the time, too. And I didn't have a driver's license. And I'd gotten into an argument with my mom about the cocaine, about how when I went to talk to her about it, her and Doug, she went out to Doug's camper that was parked on her property to talk to him and try to get my money back. And she came back with her hair messed up and her buttons crooked. And we got into an argument about that. And she kicked me out. And I remember she called the cops and she told them that I ran away because I didn't want to wash dishes. I tried explaining what was going on with the cocaine and with Doug not paying me. I remember I had just gotten a German Shepherd puppy. Her name was Wayla. And I remember Dennis and Brenda Dickinson took me in. These were my older brother's pot dealers. And I remember that 1985 Pontiac Firebird that my mom had insisted that I buy. I remember that my Uncle Greg and we had to fix the damage that he had done to the vehicle when he tried to kill Loretta. So I remember that a Camaro of the same year is the same body style. And I remember that the windows from the two were interchangeable. And I remember taking the top off of the Camaro. There were T-tops, and we put that on that 1985 Pontiac Firebird. And I remember I still worked for Janet Roberts. And I was sneaking food into my mom's house if Tara and Michael had something to eat. I remember my mom had given Kyle Leptahus a couch that she had bought. She just didn't think that it fit the living room, so she gave it away. She was always complaining about not having money. I remember her church group, how it was a bunch of women sitting around, didn't even open their Bibles. These are the most vulgar women I've ever heard. The things that they talked about, and we weren't allowed to listen in on the church group, but when women are talking about stuff like that, you hear it. This is around the time she was having sex with one of my friends from high school. I remember a lot of really screwed up situations. I remember when I was at Dennis and Brenda's, they'd given me a choice between, not Dennis and Brenda, but law enforcement here in town. They'd given me a choice between going into the system or going to Pine Ridge Job Corps Center. And we were just waiting for my application at Job Corps to go through. And I remember telling Brenda about the argument between me and Mom and the cocaine and the pound of marijuana. And I remember Brenda telling me, well, me and Dennis were the ones who got that pound of marijuana, and we're sorry. I remember Brandon Jepson had to drive us in that piece of shit. I remember we broke down once in between Lodgepole and Chapel on the way back from work, or in between Snow and Lodgepole. And I remember Brandon sat in the vehicle and steered it while I pushed it almost the whole way. I remember it was overheating, and we'd turn it on, and we'd try to drive it about 100 yards when we got to the hills, and then when we got to the top of the hill, I'd have to push it again. I remember when I got to Job Corps, there was a kid named Sonny, and he wanted to beat me up because everybody wanted to see a fight with the new kid. And I didn't fight back. I just let Sonny beat me up. And he got kicked out. He was pretty popular there, though, so a lot of kids gave me shit about it. I remember there was a girl there that everybody called Quarters because she smoked cigarettes and she wanted cigarettes, so she gave blowjobs in the woods for cigarettes. She hated being called Quarters. I remember Mr. Hicks was the paint instructor. He was also a park ranger there. And Sonny was one of his favorites. I remember he kicked me out of Job Corps at gunpoint. And it was when it was snowing. Some kids had stolen my shoes. They had stolen my work boots. I only had one shoe. And he made me walk down to the paint shop with him with just one shoe in the snow. That was the day I got kicked out. I remember I was taken to the Colton Boys and Girls Home, and that Andrew Buchter worked there. I remember Georgia was in charge of the place, and she was really mean. When Thanksgiving came around, she took all the girls to her house for Thanksgiving dinner, and we, at the Colton Boys and Girls Home, we got to eat some sandwiches, which, it's just a meal. I remember there was a boy there who, I remember Brandis Brannick telling me about being molested, about her parents. I remember her being mean because Georgia thought it was funny to hear the girls being mean to the boys. I remember me and George got into an argument one night, and she told me I had to go to my room. In these rooms, there's 4 beds in it. And I went up to my room and I laid down and turned off the lights. I just wanted to go to sleep. I remember one of the other boys, he kept coming upstairs and flicking on and off the lights. I remember I yelled at him. And I remember Adam Frericks, the deputy, arresting me. And I remember him telling me that I was the most respectful person he'd ever arrested. I remember being in jail, and I remember them telling me that I couldn't be emancipated. They don't have emancipation laws in Nebraska. And you're not a legal adult until you're 19. I was only 18. And I remember when I went to that court date, I had a guardian ad litem, and they held court to emancipate me. And then my guardian ad litem and my public defender walked out of the room, and then they charged me with disturbing the peace as an adult. I remember the Sydney High School kids coming through while I was in the jail there, and all of them peeking in the window and looking at me because I was some sort of a terrible criminal. And I couldn't quite hear what they were saying. There was too many of them, and they were too loud. And the sheriff was there telling them about how this is what happens when you break the law, and so on and so forth. And I remember when I got out, I had to find my own way back to Chapel, Nebraska. I remember that my older brother didn't live there anymore, and that Kim Jepson and her parents put me up in the garage so I could go back to high school. I still only had one shoe. They gave me shoes. They gave me a jacket. They were really good to me. Kim was my best friend at that time. She was my first ever friend in Nebraska. Ever. She worked at not Pump and Pantry, but Sweden Cream, and she was really pretty. Everybody had a crush on her. I had a crush on her rival in high school. Her name was Alyssa Derry. I remember trying out for cheerleading. They told me that I couldn't be a cheerleader because they had already ordered skirts. And I remember saying, well, I don't mind wearing a skirt. The system is hell. I remember kids just wouldn't stop being mean to me. And I was hoping that eventually they would leave me alone. I remember getting into a fight with Zach Metcalf over an argument. He had a really big crush on Kim Jepson too. And I was mad at Kim because Brandon Jepson had told me that her boyfriend, a sheriff's son from Haxton, Colorado, had pulled her out of the car by her hair. And me and Zach got into a fight over that. And I got kicked out of school and Zach didn't. Zach started the fight. He started the argument. He started the fight. He hit me a few times, just powder puffed. I remember he'd been picking on me for a while, and I did want to beat him up. I really did. I wanted him to leave me alone, and I figured if I beat him up, he'd get the point. I didn't know that was the first fight he'd ever been in. I only punched him once. And I remember he never messed with me again. But his friend William Simmons became my bully after that. And I was too afraid to fight him, not because I was afraid he'd beat me up, because he stood about as much chance as a fart in a windsock sticking around for that. But it's because I wanted to finish high school. I remember when I beat up Zach that the sheriff at the time, Jim Hayes, came and shook my hand. And I remember me and Rose Melvin cleaning up blood in the female cell here at the Dual County Jail, right off of the sheriff's office. That was my community service for beating up Zach. I remember I didn't have an ID. I didn't have a driver's license until I was 23. I remember the Jepsons putting me to work. I remember if the Jepsons put me to work, I'd go from working with the Jepsons straight to going to work with Janet Roberts cleaning Cabela's. I remember I was still sneaking food into the house over at my mom's so my little brother and sister could eat. I remember both Jepson families as being the best people ever to come out of this town. Ron and Terry Jepson were one Jepson family. Gary and Mary Jepson were the other Jepson family. I remember when Kim had her daughter, her oldest daughter. I remember when Jason was all strung out on drugs and he was living in his parents' house because they'd moved. I remember bringing blankets over for Kim and her kids because they were all there with Ron and Terry cleaning up the house after Jason had trashed it. I remember how thankful Kim was. I don't think I've ever seen her after that. I don't think I've seen Kim since.